Do one. Hello! Hi, everybody! We are here. Welcome to the live chat. We're 9 seconds in. My name is Karen. This is
Christine.
Back there is
Laura.
So we'll give people a few minutes to join us, should they wish to. This is a live Facebook chat about schools in Ontario. We are the Ontario Autism Coalition. There's a lot of parents in this group, and Christine is new to doing the Facebook Lives. We're going to give people about 2 minutes to join us. So if you're watching this after the fact, then you might want to fast forward a little bit. Got a joke, Christine?
I don't. You didn't ask me to prepare one.
I know. Both of them are on the hot seat today.
Oh, wait, I got one.
Laura's got a joke.
Why can't men get mad cow disease?
Oh no. Why can't men get mad cow disease?
Because they're pigs. Sorry.
No offense to the dad.
Delete!
We think you're great.
Mute!
I found, look, I read
We
that.
didn't really mean
I
that.
read that on a bathroom wall.
Okay.
And I just thought it was the funniest graffiti I'd seen in a long time.
We didn't mean it.
No, I didn't mean it. But it
Oh,
was
Laura.
What?
Oh!
Well, be careful what you ask
We
for.
love the fathers.
We do love the fathers.
Yeah.
That's a great.
You know what's funny is that being dyslexic and also trying to like stay in the frame because it's the opposite
No.
of what I think it's going to be.
Hi. There you go.
Does anyone have a better joke?
I could tell like a dumb blonde joke to make up for the.
Yeah, let's even it out.
Okay.
Let's even it out.
This is an 80s reference.
Okay.
Okay. Why do blondes have to wear shoulder pads?
Why do blondes have to wear shoulder pads?
I don't know.
I forgot that one.
Like, oh,
That's a good one.
Okay, or Cliff's best joke when he was like 9. What do you call an elephant in a phone booth?
An elephant in the phone booth. What?
Stuck.
That's my kind of joke.
Okay, kid jokes are bad. All right, okay, duly noted. Kid jokes.
That's my kind of joke.
All right.
All right. So we've been 2 minutes in. There's only 3 people watching. It's Saturday morning. So we're not entirely sure who's going to log in. This is an experiment. We've been doing our Facebook Lives in the evenings at about 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock, which is also hard for people because that's when you're tucking your kids in. So we thought we'd experiment with a Saturday morning. But let's get started. There's 3 people watching. Hello. Please feel free to type in hi and identify yourself. And those of you watching this after the fact, we're ready to start. So I'll start with my script. Welcome to our live chat. My name is Karen Boite, and I am a member of the Ontario Autism Coalition. This is Laura
Kirby-McIntosh.
Kirby-McIntosh, and this is
Christine Rose.
Okay, so we'll get to these 2 ladies later in a few minutes. So before we begin, please click on the links that Laura has posted. So if you look at the OAC page, somewhere around the top, you'll see that there's a document that Christine has put together, and there's also a link to the Ontario Autism Coalition's recommendations to the Ministry of Education. Both are fantastic reads, and we recommend that you look at them, and likely Laura and Christine will refer to them during the talk.
Those will actually show up as posts from you, Karen.
Oh, sorry, they'll show up as posts from me. Yeah, I can take credit for all that. Okay, so please feel free to share this live broadcast with friends in any Facebook groups that you may have. There are a whole lot of autism groups. There are a whole lot of Facebook groups for parents who have children with special needs. Please feel free to share this, where this is about parents getting together in a forum and talking about issues that concern us in terms of education for our children. So share away. We encourage you to do so. I'm going to get Laura to tell you a little bit about the OAC, Ontario Autism Coalition, and what her role has been to date. And we'll get Christine to introduce herself. And welcome. Welcome, Christine.
Thank you.
We'll get her to talk about why she's here and why we've invited her. We're going to talk about education today, the good, the bad, and the ugly. First, we'll do some pre-submitted questions that people have sent us. They're very good questions. Thank you, everyone, for doing this in advance. And after we've gone through those questions, we'll scroll through and see if other people have posted Hello, Rubina. We will see if other people have posted questions as we're talking. Okay. So, before we start, note, some of the issues that we are going to discuss today may be upsetting. And most of us learn about this stuff through osmosis over time. So if you're just getting your head around your child's diagnosis, you might feel bombarded with information. And this talk may be confusing to you. Hang in there. We know that this stuff is overwhelming and we get it, okay? So stick with us and we'll work through a lot of stuff together. Okay, Laura, who are the OAC?
The Ontario Autism Coalition is a grassroots, not-for-profit political advocacy organization. We're focused on advocating for better supports and services for people with autism and those that love them. We started back in 2005 in response to what was then an age 6 cutoff. And we started campaigning for an end to that cutoff, better supports in schools, regulation of ABA therapy, and so on. And then we were really rejuvenated in 2016 when the government tried to bring in an age 5 cutoff, like they thought we wouldn't notice or something.
We noticed.
Yeah, we did.
We really did.
We made a lot of noise, and so did a lot of other individuals and organizations, and we fought the government on that. My role is as a member of the OAC executive. There are 4 of us on the executive. Bruce, the president, who happens to be my husband, myself as vice president, our secretary-treasurer, Margaret Shabas, and Melanie Battaglia, our senior director.
Good. Thank you, Laura. That's fantastic. I'm going to cut Laura off a lot because I assume many of you who are watching this know who the OAC are, but it's always a good idea to remind people. And there is a ton of information on our website. I recommend that you check it out. Laura wrote a fantastic history of the OAC, and it's really worth, yes, you should update it. But of all the million things you have to do, yeah, please do that too. But Laura invited the gorgeous Christine Rose, who's here on my right, I guess your left. Laura, why did you invite Christine to join us today?
Well, Christine and I contacted each other on Facebook, and I can't even remember the initial point of contact, but it became clear that Christine shares my passion for education issues as they relate to autism. And in fact, she does some consulting work. And so I asked her to create a resource guide similar to our legal resource guide. If you go on the OAC website, you can find those. We're going to add the education resource guide shortly. But I'll also let her talk a little bit about her own work. And yeah, sure, go ahead.
So I am the mom of a boy with autism. My son is Nick, and he is 10 years old. He was diagnosed when he was around 6, and we always had struggles with school, and it was after his diagnosis that I really started to learn more about what the Education Act says and what the Ontario Human Rights Code says, and I decided that I wasn't going to take no for an answer when it came to school supports. Shortly after my son was diagnosed, I started a company called Nick's World. It's named after my son, Nick. And shortly after I opened up that company, I had a social worker approach me and say, you know a lot about the Education Act, you know a lot about the Human Rights Code. Perhaps you should offer it as a service to your clients where they can hire you to go into school meetings with them. So that's what I do. I do offer free consultations with parents. And then if you wish to, you can hire me to go into IPRC meetings, IEP meetings.
Thank you, Christine. And by the way, she's not selling her wares here. She's offering her 2 cents as a mom and as somebody who is an excellent advocate.
Very passionate.
We deal with, very passionate advocate. We deal with 2 tiers of government. And we mentioned this on every Facebook Live that we've done, but I want Laura to quickly clarify. We're talking about education today, and we're not talking about the OAP per se, although there's some obvious marriage between one program and the other as you're transitioning your child from one to the other. What is the difference between the Ministry of Education and MCYS what do they each manage, and what, quickly, Laura, are our two battles or process of negotiation with these two, it's both with these two ministries?
All right, so MCYS, or the Ministry of Children and Youth Services, has jurisdiction over any service that's provided by the provincial government to somebody under the age of 18. So that covers everything from children's aid to residential treatment to the Ontario Autism Program, special services at home, all of those kinds of things. The ministry is actually located right across the street from the Ministry of Education, but there's a bit of a disconnect sometimes between the two buildings. The Ministry of Education obviously has jurisdiction over schools and education in Ontario, where the lines get complicated and sometimes blurry is when we are fighting for autism-specific services and supports in schools. And there has been this sort of artificial wall between the two ministries for long, and part of what our advocacy is focused on right now is trying to tear that wall down.
Mm-hmm. So that would involve, for example, why is it that my BCBA cannot go to my kid's school?
Exactly.
Why is there no coordination? Why is there no collaboration between the professionals who work with my kid? All that sort of thing, right?
Exactly.
Is that right?
Yep.
Okay. You're going to hear a lot of terminologies. You're going to hear a lot of acronyms today. We'll try to remember to always tell you what those are. I just use the term BCBA. What is a BCBA, Laura?
It is a board-certified behavior analyst.
Okay. There's also this term PPM 140 that you'll hear mentioned a lot. What is that, Laura?
You want to take that one?
Sure. So PPM stands for Policy Program Memorandum. And basically what a PPM is it's an addenda or a directive to school boards as to how to apply the Education Act. So PPM 140 is about ABA, so Applied Behavioral Analysis in the classroom, how to apply ABA practices when working with kids that have autism.
Great, thank you, Christine. Okay, let's move on to the questions, but first, look how succinct she is. Can everyone hear us all right? Yvonne, Lisa, Gada, Rubina, can you hear us? Can we get a thumbs up or a thumbs down?
Or a smiley face.
Or a smiley face, just so we get a sense that we're heard. There's a delay. Yes. Thank you, Gada. Okay, thank you, ladies. So here's the first question from Sylvia. Sylvia asks great questions. I didn't end up enrolling my son in the public system for kindergarten, but I would like to look at all of our options so that when he starts the first grade, we may do so. So she's putting the brakes on. What advice would you give someone like myself in terms of schools to look at? And when I look at schools, what sorts of questions should I be asking and to whom? So let's start with that. What sorts of questions should you be asking a school that you are enrolling your child into, really at any age? Mm-hmm. Christine, do you have thoughts about that?
Yeah, well, one thing I would want to do is meet with the principal and discuss the issues, discuss perhaps what my child's needs are, and maybe take a look at how is that going to look in one of your classrooms with supporting my child. What kind of supports maybe do you already have in your school? I know some schools have sensory rooms, some schools have eco-classrooms, and I would want to get a sense that the principal is willing to offer support and willing to work with me in a collaborative approach as a parent with a child with special needs.
Laura, do you have thoughts?
Yeah, I think that, the first point of contact obviously is the principal, and then talking to teachers and staff. Obviously, one of the things that you can do here in the OAC Facebook group is you can network with other parents. You might even be able to find somebody that sends their kid to the same school. But so my profession is I'm a teacher. I'm a big believer in doing a walkabout through the school. I don't know, I'm a bit of an empath, but I sort of go through and sniff a school, look at the bulletin boards, look in the classrooms, see what's on the walls, look at the library, talk to kids if you can. They'll tell you the real deal about the school. But it starts with specific questions, and there's some good resources on Autism Ontario's website on this about questions to ask. But ask them about their experience with other students with autism, what they found works, what doesn't work, what kind of experience their staff has working with students with autism. Are they familiar with things like safety plans?
The IPRC.
The whole process, yeah.
Mm-hmm. One spec ed teacher gave me a very good piece of advice early on, and she said, if you can't pop by, if you have to announce your visits, then beware. Because if you've got nothing to hide, then parents can come and go, right? If there is resistance, let that be a flag.
If you feel welcome.
If you feel welcome, your kid is welcome. Yeah, that's, I think, a really good rule of thumb, right? Anna and Rubina are both getting ready to enroll their children into kindergarten, and they live in the Peel area. So they ask, what is a better school system in terms of getting support for our kids with ASD? Peel Catholic or public schools? So maybe a general question.
So I'm an employee of one of those boards,
right.
So I can't comment. But what I can say is I can answer that question regardless of which school boards that you're asking about. This is probably one of the most frequent questions I get.
Yeah.
Which
is better? Which is better?
Is best? Yeah. And the difficulty is you can have wild variation within one school board from one school to another. You can also have wild variation within one school from, a 5-year period to the next 5-year period. Really, the only answer to that question is it depends on the school, it depends on the principal, it depends on the teachers. And I've even had situations with my own son on the spectrum where we had a school situation for 3 years that was absolutely fantastic, and then a new principal came in and everything changed. And it's exhausting. We should have some level of certainty that no matter where we go, we're going to get the same level of supports and services. But one of the frustrating things is that when you go to register your kid in school and you're trying to find out which programs are available in which schools in the board, they won't tell you often. David Lepofsky says it's like going to a restaurant and they refuse to give you a menu. Really take advantage of, leverage the power of the nearly 4,000 people in this group. To talk to parents and say, hey, does anybody know good schools in this area? And you'll get answers. So when you are registering for school, I also got another very good piece of advice from a woman running a special needs nursery school that my child went to. And if you feel that your child is a candidate for special education, when you register for kindergarten, which is now, if you want to do it now, go and ask to speak to the principal specifically and let them know that you believe your child's school registration will be a paper registration. So in other words, chances are you may not use your home school. This is something for people to be aware of when you're registering for kindergarten. If you're fortunate, your local school has a spec ed class or a diagnostic kindergarten or some kind of accommodations that you're happy with and your kid gets into that program. Most children who attend school do not attend school in their own neighborhoods. So when in Toronto, with autism, excuse me. Your local school is the one that's down the street, but the one with the best autism program could be anywhere.
So you apply at your home school, and then you go through a process of what? What happens?
So one thing I would recommend to parents is start the IPRC process early. So IPRC is Identification, Placement, and Review Committee.
Do they not call them SEPRCs before you start school? In Toronto, they are, as you're entering kindergarten, they call them SEPRCs. It's the same.
Okay. So you want to start that early because many school boards will approve their funding for the following year. Probably, it depends on the board, but a lot of them are like April, May is when they start to approve their funding for the following year. And the reason you want them to know that you have a child coming into their system with special education needs is so that they can say, okay, we need to get our ducks in a row, we need to get our supports or our funding in order so that when this child starts school in September, there's going to be supports in place.
Mm-hmm. So
and that process, when that paper is filed with the school board, that gives that school board funding specifically for that child.
Right. So you want to get on that. Get on that right away. Okay. Brandy, a similar question. Brandy says, how to best navigate those first meetings with school to discuss your child's specific needs. I have a meeting next week for my 4-year-old son who is nonverbal.
Okay, so I want to take this as somebody that can speak from the perspective of both a parent and a teacher. And it was really interesting for me when we registered my son for school to sort of have to walk over to the other side of the desk. The approach that I followed that brought us a lot of success in the early years was to be honest and upfront about my child's strengths, but also my child's challenges. And to show the appropriate level of respect for educators. I would do little things, and it's just like bring coffee to the meeting, bring some Timbits to the meeting, understand that teachers' days are packed, and say, look, here are the areas where my kid is going to be challenging. Here's the areas where they're going to be successful and they're really going to shine. And here's how I can help. Here's the information that I can give you. We had a booklet that we made up that was all about me, and it was a picture of my kid, and it was a list of what he liked, what were his motivators, what were his strengths, what were his interests. And I would give that just as an easy thing to the kindergarten or the grade 1 teacher to say, here's an easy way to get to know my kid. Every September from kindergarten to now, my boy's in grade 11, grade 12, I send out an email called 10 Things Your Student with Autism Wishes You Knew. It's easily found on the internet. And then as we sort of move forward, I'd say, I don't want to bury you in information, but if you have specific questions about things like ABA or about echolalia, because he was so echolalic at that point, let me know and I'll send that to you. So I tried to present myself as a member of the team and as somebody that was prepared to share resources and expertise, but somebody that was mindful of all of the different restraints on their time, all the different directions that they're being
Can you give
pulled
a
in.
simple tip? So here's a mom, she's got a 4-year-old, she's freaked out.
Yeah.
You're walking in, maybe a little bit intimidated.
Take somebody with
Take
you.
a friend.
Take a friend.
Please.
Yep.
Call us. We'll go.
Yeah.
But don't go into the meetings alone because it can be kind of overwhelming. And I mean, definitely there are some times where I think the meetings have so many staff there that it must be some deliberate conspiracy to intimidate you. But sometimes that's just legitimately how many staff they have that are related to your kid. But it can feel like a big wall of us and them. Mm-hmm. And the us is only you. And there's like all these people and, they speak education lingo and short forms and abbreviations. And don't be shy about stopping them and going, I'm sorry, what does that stand for?
Some people forget because this is their job, so they use these short forms, and you're new. You're just coming in trying to figure out what your kid needs and what to ask for and how to help them expedite how they get to know him or her and all those sorts of things.
And I would like to add as well, take any documentation that you have. So if you have assessments, anything that you might have from therapy, any psych assessments that have been done, always take paperwork to back up your case and start a binder.
Yes.
I would, in the binder, so I have a binder, actually I think I have 2 binders at home for Nick. Mm. One is like 3 inches, the other one is probably 2 inches. Mm. And I have it into separate tabs, and I've got, his report cards, I have his IEPs, but I also have his psych ed assessment. I have his hearing tests. I have any report, any assessment that has ever been done is in that binder, so that when I go into a meeting, I can very quickly refer to it and pass on a copy to the school as well.
Great.
If I can just add on, I think what you're trying to do in the early stages really is build a culture of communication and collaboration between yourself and the school team. So the more that you show that you're willing to share information about your kid, that you're not like hiding reports, that you want to communicate regularly, ask, how can we communicate on an ongoing basis? Who shall I email? Who's going to be the point of contact? Mm-hmm. So you're not emailing the entire team, but really try to foster that openness be ready to share, sign consent forms to say the school board can talk to, if you have a home-based ABA team, sign a consent to let them communicate, sign a consent to let them talk to whoever did the psychoed report. The more you show yourself as somebody who's
a collaborator,
help,
yeah, the
more difficult it's going to be for them to sort of shut it down and say, well, no, we're not going to collaborate.
Yeah.
You want to foster that. And kindness goes a long way.
And this is potentially an 8 or a 10-year relationship.
Yeah.
And
maybe
so you want to, maybe. And so you really want to have everybody on the same side.
Yeah. Always go in with goodwill if you can. It's not always easy when you're frightened and nervous, and also if you've been burned a couple of times, it's not always easy. We're going to talk about some of that stuff. Like I said, the good, the bad, and the ugly. We're not here to throw anybody under the bus. That's for sure. Okay, so Anastasia, this is a tough one. So you better come back quickly, Laura.
I'm coming back.
She's going to plug in the laptop so it doesn't die.
We need battery.
Anastasia says, the school board may put communication restrictions in place. As a parent, I can only talk to the teacher at a certain time during the year. And if my son struggles, I have no right to have a phone call or meet for 15 minutes with the teacher. The school board may also instruct the teacher not to answer my questions in the agenda so that there is no evidence of my son's struggles. How can parents appeal both approaches efficiently? Superintendents are aware, but insist that there's too much communication coming from parents without any specifics. Whether something was related to meeting their needs. Thank you. Okay, so this lady is saying that she can only speak to the teacher at certain times, and when she does, an agenda is produced and she is not able to talk about any subject that isn't on their agenda. I have 1,000 responses, but I'll let Christine and Laura handle this. Yeah, okay. So let's just start with this.
Okay.
Let's say, she says she can only see the teacher certain times of the year, and she cannot have a phone call or 15-minute chat at the door with the teacher. What do you say to that?
The thing that's clear to me immediately is that there's some background behind Anastasia's question. So some things have happened that have gotten you guys to this point, and I don't imagine it's been a fun or interesting journey. So it sounds to me like you're going to need some help to dial it back a little bit. And get back to a place where there can be some communication. It sounds to me like you need an advocate. Somebody from the Ontario Child Advocates Office may be able to help, or somebody like Christine. But it sounds to me like you need someone else to come in there and try to assess how did it get to this point and how do you dial it back. I will say that I read a really interesting case recently on the Ontario Human Rights Tribunal website about a similar situation where communication was severely restricted. And the tribunal actually found that by doing so, the school board made the situation for the child worse, not better, and awarded damages. So I hope you don't have to go the route of filing a complaint with the Human Rights Tribunal. You may, but it sounds to me like the situation has deteriorated to a point where I wouldn't recommend that you continue to try this on your own. Reach out to some other people.
So, Christine, if you are helping a family where the relationship has become as toxic as this seems to be, what is your role when you, and I don't mean as a paid person, I mean as a friend sitting with another friend, how can you de-escalate? How can we get people talking?
So I find what happens is we get so passionate as parents. And Mama Bear comes out.
Oh, yeah.
And when Mama Bear comes out...
Mama Bear came out just reading this.
Yes. Negotiations. Negotiations will break down at that point. You have to check your emotions at the door, and that's really hard. And so that's why I will advise parents, take somebody with you that can kind of, maybe go... give you a little nudge when they when you're maybe getting a little heated.
Yeah.
What she meant to say was,
Yes. Or if you, as the parent, feel there's no way you're going to have anything come out of your mouth that isn't super emotionally charged, then have that person talk for you.
Yeah.
And it would be an advantage to have somebody that kind of knows the rules, and knows a little bit about human rights, because sometimes the law has to be laid down in those circumstances.
They have to be reminded, right?
They have to have their memory refreshed on some things. And but it has to be done in a way where there's not so much emotion behind it, because that's what will happen is the school will say, you know what, we're stopping this discussion right here because we feel like we're being attacked. And so that's what I would advise.
Yeah.
I've even heard of cases where parents were like banned from walking on the school property.
Yeah.
It's just so clearly,
and
a situation like that.
As passionate as we all feel, you really don't want to go there.
You know, when I was,
is it possible maybe sometimes that husbands and wives should not go for this reason, depending on how?
Yeah, although sometimes I find
it depends on the family and the couple.
Sometimes I find that they may listen to the husband more than they'll listen to the mom.
Yeah.
And I think that sometimes what happens in those cases is because the husband doesn't get as emotional. Or it could be reversed, but you may have, where your spouse is not maybe as an emotional person as you are. My husband has nowhere close to the emotion that I carry. And so he is always very level-headed, very calm. He never gets excited about anything. He's also incredibly smart.
Yeah.
And so he can word things sometimes in a way.
So Anastasia, bring a friend. And if you're still having trouble, you can contact us. Maybe we can find someone to help you. This is very serious, and you need to have a good relationship with your school. I can tell you that I had a toxic relationship with a school, and I just pulled them. They didn't like it, but I found another one. And I had a fantastic relationship. It's the Wild West out there, folks. Okay, from Alyssa. How about, here's her question, how can schools be held accountable for following IEPs? So first of all, Laura, what is an IEP?
So an IEP is an individual education plan. After you've done the IPRC meeting and they've determined what the appropriate classroom placement is for your kid, the next thing for a special needs student is to come up with a document that states their strengths and their needs and how the curriculum is going to be adapted in terms of the learning environments, teaching strategies, and assessment and evaluation strategies. You want to be deeply involved in the writing of that IEP, and there's some great resources online. But once that IEP is set, then that is a legal document, and the school and the teachers at that school are obligated to live by that document. As with all good laws, policies, charters, statements of intent, words on a piece of paper are only valuable if they can be enforced. And unfortunately, it's your job to enforce it. There's no one else that's going to come along and check and make sure that, if the IEP says that your child gets, double time for tests, the only way they're going to get double time for the tests is if you insist on it. If your child comes home and is able to communicate to you that they didn't get that, you need to be right in there going, excuse me, it says right here that, and you've got to work that out.
It's a good example too of like how things start to get toxic. Yeah. Right? Because it's a lot of work to look at your child's development like you're a laser beam and participate alongside with schools and teachers, right? And then you become one of those moms.
Oh God.
Right?
Before I had kids, I used to make comments about those special needs.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think someone upstairs is having fun with me because now I am one.
Yeah.
That first time that you find something on the IEP isn't being followed, the first time there's an incident with your kid.
Christine's taking deep breaths.
Yeah.
Because I know how it feels.
But how you
my God. Again, I have to talk about this again. Oh, okay, right?
But how you handle that first one really sets the tone for future ones. And you need this magical combination of collaborative, open-mindedness, I want to work with you, not against you on this, but an absolute rod iron in your spine, brick wall, you shall not pass, you shall not violate my kids' rights.
Yeah.
And it's so hard to find that spot.
Yeah.
And if you have a really lovely special ed teacher, they will allow you to sit down with them at the IEP writer. It's a software that they use and allow you to collaborate right alongside with them. I have sat, there was one specific special ed teacher at a high school in my area where I was helping a parent, and she allowed us to go into the IEP writer software with her. And
Laura's like, really? What is this? What?
We completely customized every aspect of that IEP for that child.
Yeah.
And just so you know, so when they're doing IEPs in that software, there's drop-down menus for instructional, environmental, and assessment accommodations. And in each of those drop-down menus, there's about 75 items. And they're not going to put all 75 in there. They're going to choose, you know, what they feel might be the top 5 best. And I mean, we can start a whole conversation about this.
Yeah.
So actually, if you go on to the Ministry of Education website, you can find the IEP resource guide. And in that IEP resource guide, it lists several of those.
We need Brent here posting these. He's not here today. Posting these links. That's amazing. Oh, I lost it. I had a good question. I lost it.
It's okay.
Okay, so along with that, Aaron asks, does the principal have to be present legally when you are viewing your child's OSR? So, Christine, what is an OSR?
So the OSR is the Ontario Student Record. And in preparation for this question, I went online and did some research yesterday on the ministry website. And you can find the OSR guidelines on the ministry website. And in that, it does say that the principal is responsible for the security of that document. They're responsible to ensure that whatever is in that document stays in that document. So basically what it is it's a file folder, and it has all of the pertinent information relating to your child. So it has, of course, all the, you know, their name, their address, has report cards. It would also have their IPRC decision statement. It would have their IEP. It would have, if there was any ever suspensions or violent incidents, they would have the incident reports in there. And so they should. If you want to go in and view your child's OSR, you have a right to view it. But chances are the principal will be looking over your shoulder when you're doing so.
Correct me if I'm wrong, though.
And I think it's because they have the obligation to make sure everything stays where it is.
But correct me if I'm wrong. Do parents not have a right to remove any items from the OSR that they wish to? My understanding is that they can, but I don't want to be wrong.
It has to go, because the principal is responsible for, I'm just looking on my phone here. Because the principal is responsible for what's in that document, I believe that they kind of have say. Of course, the board would have say as well as to what stays and what goes. Right. Okay. And there are certain things that they have to keep in there.
Great. Thanks, Christine. Sylvia, thanks for posting the link. You rock, as always. Okay. Alicia asks, what could be done to allow parents into the classroom to provide additional support for their children? This is my question. So I want to back up a little bit. So we're talking about IEPs. It's pretty overwhelming. Now, if there's a parent saying, look, I've never given a moment's thought to how someone is educated. I'm trying to get my head around the fact that my kid learns differently. So how can I possibly look at an IEP and try to derive a plan with the teacher when I don't even really know where they're headed or what they understand or don't understand?
A couple of thoughts. One is that if you have a home or center-based ABA team, the lead therapist or the senior therapist there is probably one of your best resources. If you don't, then certainly talking to other parents and saying, finding somebody that has a kid that's kind of like yours and saying, hey, what'd you put in your kid's IEP? The internet is a great tool, just going on and reading sample, like do a Google search on, IEP Ontario, look at images and see what comes up. You'll get some ideas there. Talking to teachers, talking to the special ed resource teacher or the CERT at your school, and saying, can you give me some guidance based on, here's a profile of what my kid is like. What do you think should be it?
Because I think that there will be obviously some teachers in the system who will go like, look, these parents want my child to do grade level work and we don't even quite know how to reach this child yet. We haven't been able to assess them. This is a complicated business, right? And sometimes being really sure about how things should go can be we can be our own worst enemies, and sometimes our instincts are right on the money.
Sometimes they're off. But am I right that the IEP is a living document?
It is a working document. It can be edited
right?
At any time throughout the year. And I would also utilize the other professionals that are working with my child. So what does my occupational therapist feel my child might benefit from on the IEP? Some psych assessments. So I know our psych assessment, it was 37 pages long, and then
we'll
the last 9 pages were recommendations.
Yeah.
So
great, thanks, Christine. So I'll go back to Alicia's question. So she wants to know, how come she can't go into the classroom and provide additional support? And she also wants to know if she can show EAs and the teacher how to implement strategies that are used outside the school, in home and therapy, and develop more of a cohesive, consistent environment. So, again, the 2 tiers, we've got MCYS, we've got programs over here, we've got programs in the school, they're not talking to each other, and mom, dad are learning. We are learning all the time. And it's kind of a no-brainer for us to want all of these elements to merge into the classroom. And so mom is an expert of sorts. Why can't she go into the classroom and help?
So in some cases, especially in kindergarten classes and some of the younger grades, they will allow parent volunteers. You have to fill out a form, but you could offer to volunteer in the child's classroom with the understanding that you wouldn't be working only with your child. So you may be volunteering maybe you're volunteering in the Strong Start reading program, or just getting yourself in the school as a volunteer is helpful, because then you get to see your child's teacher more often face-to-face in the school because you're in the school helping out. And I know in the last school talk that you had talked about getting onto the parent council and just getting known in other circumstances within the school, not just as Mama Bear that's trying to help your kid, but getting known as somebody that's trying to help out overall. And then there's also, if you go on to the ministry website, I think under the teacher section, there's something called What Works? Research into Practice. And these are articles that are written by teachers for teachers, and some of them are special education, relevant to special education, and working with kids with special needs. And sometimes I will, if I come across an article on that page, there's all sorts of them, I may, go, hey, I found this on the teacher section of the ministry website that you might want to, give a read, and maybe this will help you out.
Do you have any experience with people wanting to go into the classroom and not being permitted, or give a view on that, Laura? Well, certainly, as a teacher?
So the thing that's going through the back of my mind is, what if I'm a working parent and I don't have time to, what if I work nights, or what if I'm working 18-hour days on the regular? Sure, I'd love to go in and volunteer to read. So it is, if you've got that time available, then do it. But schools, I think, have to understand that from an equity perspective, that's not something that all parents can do. The other issue, though, about parents coming into the classroom is that some teachers can perceive that as a bit threatening. From a liability issue, you're not allowed to go into those classroom spaces unless you've had a criminal background check, unless you've done all of the appropriate paperwork. So it's not as simple as just walking in and saying, here, I'm here to help. Can I help do this or that? That being said, when it's possible to do so, you should definitely give it a try. But there's other ways of going about it as well. Other parents might ask the question, well, what about my kid's ABA therapist? Can they go into the school? And we run into the same liability issues and legalities here. Mm-hmm. And it's crazy to me that you have somebody who is acceptable to the Ministry of Children and Youth Services to deliver ABA therapy through even a regional program direct service provider, and yet they show up at the school door and there's this brick wall. Mm-hmm. No, you cannot pass, and you can't go in and work with that kid. Mm-hmm. A big focus of our advocacy is therefore getting a regulatory framework in place for ABA therapists, mm-hmm. so that they can enter the school, but also providing more training to education assistants so that they have more expertise and can do the things that need to be done.
So currently, Laura, educational assistants, mm-hmm. what kind of training do they have as a rule?
Mm-hmm. It varies. Okay. So at the low end, in some school boards, you have EAs that are required to have a high school diploma and not much else. Other school boards will require an undergraduate degree or perhaps a certificate in early childhood education or some sort of education-related thing, but it can vary widely. One of the things that we're starting to, we have been advocating for years, is more intensive training for education assistants in special ed in general. And in some provinces, like in British Columbia, for instance, I was talking by a Skype to an education assistant in Surrey a couple of weeks ago. And she was first an ABA therapist in the community, got 1,000 hours of experience, did a course at Surrey College, and now works as an ABA support worker with the child in the school system. So mm-hmm. other jurisdictions do this very differently, and there's a lot of room for improvement.
Mm-hmm. Right. So EAs technically are not instructors. Is that correct?
No, they're assistants to the teacher. The teacher has primary responsibility for delivering education in the classroom and interpreting the curriculum. The education assistant is there to help modify the curriculum if necessary for a student that has an IEP and to provide extra support. But as our members know, it's really hard to get a one-to-one education assistant dedicated to your child. If you get one at all, often it's shared between multiple kids in the classroom, and there's just a whole ton of challenges that come with that.
And it's a big kettle of fish. Katie asks, I'm waiting for psych ed, which is a psychological assessment that schools do, but they're looking into a character network class. Does anyone know anything about these places? I've never heard of a class like that.
I don't know if this is like a social skills group that they're talking about. Because every board kind of has their own programs that they run. I'm not sure what maybe that is. I will try to do it.
So we'll post in the main group and see if anyone else has heard of. Mm-hmm. But this is the kind of thing where, like, this could be just a program that individual school has developed, or that school board runs this program and no other school.
How many different school boards are there in Ontario?
72.
72 school boards.
There 72 different governments.
72 different management groups and different interpretations of.
So I think that the Character Network program must be at the Hamilton Wentworth District School Board.
I don't know where Katie is from. So Katie, we'll look it up if you do watch this, but we'll do some due diligence and try to do some posting, perhaps. Yes?
Yeah.
Okay, let's move on to Heather's question. Hi, Heather. By the way, we are reading your questions here, and we will get to them, those of you who've posted some questions. I'm just going through the pre-submitted ones that we're not.
Stop, you're making me dizzy.
Okay, so from Heather, from Heather, how are school boards defining violence? As in violence in the classroom. Hitting, kicking, spitting. And is there no mitigating factors within that definition? So for example, if EAs are being expected to support students who are under that definition, what are the boards and the ministry doing to provide appropriate training and support for those EAs who are required to deal with aggression on a daily basis?
That's such a good question.
So it's a great question, and I think the answer is going to be multifaceted. Yes?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so let's talk about just the definition of violence before we get into how it's being managed or not managed. So what would constitute a violent act? Is that an obvious question?
Yeah, so what she has posted, the hitting, the kicking, the spitting, if even if a student were to take a book and throw it off their desk, anything that might be considered threatening.
What about kicking into the air? But not making contact
Yeah,
with
I think
anything.
it's really open for interpretation depending on the teacher.
Is that a problem?
It can be. I think of how we would define this in our homes, right? When our kids are having meltdowns and if they're being aggressive. I don't know that there is a specific definition of violence in the Education Act or in board policies, but if I'm listening to the question correctly, I think what's behind it is two things. One is, what are the factors that can be taken into consideration for suspending a child with autism if they have a violent outburst? And does their diagnosis count as a mitigating factor? And the answer to that is absolutely yes, it should. We should no more be suspending a kid with autism for we should suspend a child with Tourette's for swearing, right? It's part of the disability. These things happen. And principals, though, get really freaked out about safety and liability. More and more, this is a personal rant, but more and more the job of principal is that of a lawyer, looking at every situation going, oh my God, given that this just happened, who might sue us? And how can I stop them from suing us? And so, if other kids are going home going, Johnny flipped his desk over today and hurled a book across the room, our parents are going to start calling in and saying, what the hell's going on in there? How are you keeping my kids safe? And the easier solution sometimes for the principal is to suspend that kid and get them out of there. And then over time, that can lead to exclusions and a whole bunch of other difficulties. The second part of the question is, what are school boards doing to provide proper training and support to the EAs and the teachers that are on the front line in these situations? And the unfortunate answer is not nearly enough. And that's why you're hearing more and more about violence in schools in the media, because school unions or teacher unions has started to take data on how many violent incidents their members are experiencing per year, and the number is increasing. And that's a symptom of the bigger issue, which is the lack of training and the lack of meaningful supports in the classroom.
Mm-hmm. So I do have there is PPM 120, which discusses reporting violent incidents. Okay. So violence, according to the ministry, is defined as possessing a weapon, including possessing a firearm, physical assault causing bodily harm requiring medical attention, sexual assault, robbery, using a weapon to cause or to threaten bodily harm to another person, extortion, hate and or bias-motivated occurrences. One thing I would say that I think school boards, when it comes to violent students, when it comes to violent behavior, they're acting more as a reaction to the violence as opposed to prevention. Mm-hmm. And I think if there was an overall better knowledge of ABA practices, mm-hmm. and proper collecting of data, and somebody to analyze that data to look, okay, every time we do carpet time, Johnny throws a chair. And then how can we prevent this? So the school boards are reacting to the violence, but they're not looking at how do we prevent it in the first place? Mm-hmm. How do we prevent these meltdowns?
Yeah. So Christine, I think she's hit on a really important point, mm-hmm. that we are working with a school system that is reactive rather than proactive.
And I can tell you, so I have a friend that's a CERT, and she, they're using PPE gear. They're using Kevlar vests and Kevlar, protection on their body to ensure that they're not getting hurt. They're using masks so that if they're spit at, and that's a reactive approach.
I remember when the Simcoe board got in hot water because they equipped their EAs with blocker shields, like the ones in karate class.
Yeah.
So, I mean, all of those are symptoms of a school system that's really in crisis.
Yeah.
And is, as Christine said, reactive and not proactive.
Yeah.
So we've been working really hard, pressing the Ministry of Education to do more to provide that kind of training.
Yeah.
The pilot project that was announced earlier this year is a small baby step in the right direction. So there are 19 different school boards where EAs are receiving 40 hours of ABA-based training. Hopefully the data will be out soon from that program, and we can convince the government to expand it. But the answer to solving these issues is not, to provide protective equipment and shields to EAs, but it's to provide them with the training that's necessary to prevent the incidents, while recognizing, by the way, and this is important for parents to understand, meltdowns are a reality. They're gonna happen, and it's nobody's fault. My husband's a diabetic. You can take all the steps necessary to monitor your blood sugar and keep it even, and sometimes just
it spikes,
right?
Yeah.
And it's the same with our kids. So we have to work with schools to say, look, let's talk about when this happens, how we will respond. Let's not just talk about making sure that it never happens, because that's not realistic.
That's not realistic. Michelle asked a question, and when I read it, it may sound a little inflammatory, but I have a feeling she didn't mean it this way. So we're talking about violence now, and it kind of is what it is. None of us like it. Many different people have very different responses and in terms of how to manage it, and we hear in the news and see in the news, and some of our members have been on the receiving end of some very extreme reactions from schools. So Michelle says, how will meltdowns be handled, and if there are alternatives to handcuffing and calling the police, right? So this has happened. This has happened. This is not just in the States. This has happened in Ontario. Now, if somebody is watching who has experienced this, Laura, what would you say to this mom or dad who is on fire after their child has been treated this way? What do they do? Let's say we acknowledge this is rare. Yeah. Okay. But this is the good, the bad, and the ugly. So we're talking about a really extreme situation where things have gone bad all the way along the road. Okay. So someone is in crisis. Their child has been mishandled tremendously. They are lost and confused and terrified and furious.
This is where you've got to bring in the cavalry and get some support. Because the situation, I mean, there are a couple of ways that this happens. One is if you transition a kid to a new school or a new environment and you don't provide them with the supports necessary, then they're going to explode. If you're not paying attention to their sensory triggers, you're not paying attention to their individual needs, they're going to explode. It's going to happen. If it's gotten to that point where police have been called, if a child's been handcuffed, if a child's been restrained, you need backup. You need an advocate like Christine, someone from the Child's Advocate's Office. You may need legal representation. And it's hard for me to comment more specifically because it depends on the individual facts of the case.
That's right.
It's such a tragic example of how schools, our schools are being asked to deal with things that they in the past didn't have to deal with. I mean, if we go back 30 years, some of our kids would have been institutionalized. Some of our kids would not have been allowed in mainstream schools. So On the one hand, it's good that those days are over, but on the other hand, some of our kids go through phases where their behaviors spike. Puberty sucks. And we certainly saw that in our family. And so there may be times where, school is just not the priority. You got to manage the behavior first. So you need to call on your ABA team if you have one. You need to call on your doctor. You need to call on the psychologist that maybe did the psychoeducational report, a psychiatrist that may look at a medication if that's appropriate. You really need the whole team involved there.
So in other words, you need to get as much support around you as possible.
Yeah.
And don't call for backup. And there will be other parents in the community who will do that. I'm tearing up just at the thought. And of course, we know this is an exception rather than the rule. And but it's happened, and it's happening to many children.
And I would say too, if you don't have a safety plan in place, then make sure that you put a safety plan in place, outlining your child's triggers, what works and what doesn't work in those situations.
Yeah. Too often schools wait until an incident like this to create a safety plan.
Yeah.
So if you see aggression starting to be a problem at home,
reactive rather than proactive.
Well, sometimes there's no better time to sit down and write a really detailed safety report or plan than after an incident like that.
Yeah. Sylvia, let's bring it down. Whoa, we're emotional just at the thought of a situation like that.
Need wine.
Yeah, we need wine. And Michelle,
is it new?
Michelle,
12:03.
Yeah, it's 12:03. Okay. Michelle, if you are a mom dealing with a severe situation, please get help. Get help, please. Sylvia. Another question from Sylvia. Sylvia, is there a parental component to psychological assessments?
Can you handle that, Christine?
Yeah. So if the school is choosing to do a psych ed assessment, yes, you have input into that because you know your child best. And the other thing I would like to say too is even if the school is doing a psych ed assessment, you as the parent still get to choose what gets shared from that assessment with the school and what doesn't. So you still have an element of control over that assessment. Mm-hmm. But yeah, you will absolutely be interviewed for that assessment because an assessment is psych ed assessment is quite a process. Yeah. There's multiple questionnaires that would be filled out by the parents, by the teachers, by anybody that's working with the child. And then there would be face-to-face interviews with the psychologist.
Is that why it takes so long for them to get going on that stuff?
Well, okay, so I can comment on so I am from Waterloo Region, and the board that I most often deal with is the Waterloo Region District School Board. And I can tell you that most schools in that board are given 2, maybe 3 assessments per year, each school. At any given time, they would have maybe half a dozen to a dozen kids that need assessments. And so what happens is each year their multidisciplinary team sits down, discusses, here's the list of kids that we think need assessments. Now we have to pick 2 that get to have it. And so oftentimes kids are waiting several years in order to get an assessment done by the school board. So if you have benefits and you can get a psych assessment done outside of the school, I recommend doing it. Mm-hmm. If the school's offering to do it, then by all means take them up on it.
But Laura, maybe you can chime in.
Sure. I had to get wine.
She's getting some wine.
We'll
Cheers. Okay, so Christine just recommended the possibility of hiring a psychologist to do their own psych assessment. Now, tell me if I'm wrong, Laura. I have heard that some schools will not accept assessments done. Now, am I wrong? Assessments done by outside bodies, they prefer their in-house people?
They may prefer them, but I don't think they have the ability to just reject a psych.
Will it be as effective, I guess, is the question? Because, it's a lot of money, right?
It is.
For us to make that kind of recommendation. Yeah. And, again, anything we say, use your own discretion on what choices you make. What choices you make for your child. We're 3 moms in it. We're just in it. you know? Okay.
I would say, you know, if you're thinking of going the private route to get an assessment, then communicate with your school team, right? Make sure that they know that you're doing that. Ask them in advance, are there certain things that you want to see included in the report, and then you can give that information, and then the school would be more likely to accept it. If you just sort of go off blind and say, well, they said I had to have an assessment, ask the school, what specifically do you want assessed?
Why do we need these assessments, and can they work against us sometimes? Two-part question.
So we need the assessments so that teachers know what they're dealing with, and schools know what they're dealing with. I find it very interesting as a mom, just when both of my kids had their assessments done, data came back that I wasn't aware of. You know, I didn't know what percentile my kid was reading at. I didn't know it was that high. Excuse me.
Somebody's at the door. Hello?
You want to pick this up while I go?
Sure. So I always, understanding creates knowledge. And as an example, our psych assessment is 37 pages long. When I passed it on to the school, one thing I did was I went through the assessment and I highlighted the areas where it said the school should do this or the school would be advised to do that, so that most of their work was done for them. I respect that teachers are very, very busy, and so I wanted to make things as easy for them to pull out of it as possible. But yeah, that psych assessment is so valuable because it explains in detail more about the diagnosis, what it means to have autism, how that might create a challenge in your child's life, but then it also talks about, you know, where their reading level is at, where their math level is at, where their cognitive abilities are at, where their struggles might be. Yeah.
And it might be important to know too that it is an assessment of how the child is performing, right? So I can say, for example, I clearly knew that my son could do a lot more than he actually did in performing for a stranger who was the psychologist, nice lady, but he wasn't going to give her anything. And that in a way was a little bit frustrating, right? So I think there are a lot of people with non-speaking children, for example, whose assessments are they're assessed at a much lower aptitude than they probably have, you know, like, so there's a lot of, this is complicated stuff, is all I'm saying.
And something, you know? Too, a lot of schools prefer to wait until the child is maybe at the end of the grade 2, starting grade 3, only because that's when they're more likely to pick up learning disabilities.
So Faith asks, can a school refuse to create a safety plan saying he isn't registered with them? So she goes on. My son attends a day treatment program and he is registered with them. Once a week, he attends our home school for half a day. The principal at the local school is refusing to create a safety plan for him or give any report progress cards. He has one at the DTP and the daycare. So this little boy is in school part-time, and the principal says no, there will be no safety plan for him.
So
that's strange.
And I kind of followed the comments that followed this question when it was posted yesterday, and somebody brought up a very good point of, well, who's liable for this child when they're in that building? Are they just being abandoned in the school building and nobody is looking after them?
This is
that's weird.
Where, okay, so there's advice that I'll give from time to time. Use this sparingly, but this is where, if you're in a meeting with the principal, and I mean, if you can get the principal recorded saying, no, we will not do a safety plan, that's gold. And we'll talk about the value of recording meetings later. But this is the point in the meeting where I would be looking over at the principal and saying, okay, so just to clarify, you're refusing to create a safety plan for my child. So my follow-up question is, if my child has a meltdown and is restrained or someone else is injured as a result of that meltdown, I just want to be clear about who has made this decision to refuse to do a safety plan. and who is liable. When you drop that word liable into the meeting, and everything changes. Now be careful about how often you use this word, okay? Because it does very quickly lead to a toxic relationship. But it sounds to me like this is just, why would they possibly refuse? I can't think of a logical reason.
Yeah. Or if you don't want to use the word liable, you say, well, who's responsible?
Yeah.
You know, I go for the heart. I go, I'm worried. I'm worried he's going to get hurt.
Yeah.
You know, like as a human being, unless, well, you know, there's principles and there's principles, but it is an odd thing for a school to deny.
That contrast between us, because like I teach law at high school, so I go straight for like liability. Yes,
I go. I'm all about heart,
and you're the artist,
you know,
and the
artist
person. But this raises a really good point.
Yeah.
From the perspective of like strategy, when you're going into meetings with teachers and principals and officials, sometimes it's good to use a good cop, bad cop approach.
Yeah.
So if Karen here is my partner and we're going in and we're advocating, then I'm deliberately going to play bad cop to her good cop.
Yeah.
Back when we were advocating for my son and he wound up excluded from school for 10 months, I would play good cop because I was the teacher, and I would go in and I would deliberately use teacher talk and, you know, acronyms and make everybody feel comfortable that, I get the challenges of teaching my kid. And then my husband would play bad cop. And that can be a really useful strategy. And you gotta
I'd be scared.
Well, no, the meeting you were scared about was the one where both of us went in and deliberately were bad cop.
Yeah.
But that was an awesome meeting. But you also have to read the people that you're dealing with and figure out, okay, is now the time to push? Do I go with softness? Do I say, I'm worried about my kid, I'm worried about other kids, I'm worried about your staff and somebody getting hurt, and if we don't do this, I'm afraid of the consequences.
Yeah.
Or are you at a point where it's time to drop the liability word into the room?
Yeah.
You gotta.
It's really hard. And again, here you are doing all of this work that all of us wish we didn't have to do. It's strange to realize how much the world is designed for people who are able-bodied and neurotypical, and those people who are not intimately familiar with folks who are different really can't get their head around how to manage them. And we think that people can, but we do. We have to advocate for our children. It's a lot of work, everybody. It's a lot of work. Okay, so this is a very complicated question, and it's an excellent one from Lisa. Lisa really knows her stuff. Okay, so we're going to have to dissect it, I think. And I've only got a few more questions, and then we can open it up. We're at the 1 hour and 12-minute mark. But this is a great question from Lisa. Thank you for posting it, Lisa. Here we go. What steps has the Ministry of Education taken to provide documented follow-through with goals children are being taught in their behavioral plans with the new OAP? The OAP is?
The Ontario Autism Program.
Which is run by?
The Ministry of Children and Youth
Right,
Services.
so MCYS, Ministry of
Not the
Education,
Ministry of
two silos, right? Okay, so what sort of commitment have they made to construct a consistent procedure mandated in all boards to ensure, this is a great question, Lisa, to ensure follow-through is happening during the child's attendance at school? Are they planning to meet with stakeholders and advocates to discuss this and their plan of action? I'm very concerned about the lack of follow-through for children using augmentative communication. Their access to, okay, I'll just stop there because there's a lot more. Hey, Lisa, I think you should join the board.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah.
So,
you know your stuff.
Okay, so Ministry of Education. So what are they doing to help with follow-through? This could be transitions. This can also be children who are simultaneously attending therapy programs and school. So what is the Ministry of Education doing, Laura, Queen of Shit Disturbers? Zero, she says.
Okay.
Maybe she said that.
First of all, this is Lisa's question.
This is Lisa.
Lisa, congratulations on being a parent that can identify not just the issues that are affecting your kid, but the systemic issues that are affecting all kids. I love when parents get to that point. Sometimes your kid is in too much crisis for you to see that far. Second, the answer is not much now, but hopefully more later. When we were working on the education reports that we delivered to Minister Hunter in the spring of 2016, the key word that kept coming up as,
sorry, Minister Hunter was?
The former Minister of Education.
That's right.
So we, members of the OAC, a number of parents and some individuals with autism collaborated to write a report called New Horizons. And it was a series of over 60 recommendations about how to improve outcomes for students with autism in Ontario schools. And one of the words that kept coming up over and over and over again is the word accountability. If funding is given to a board to be spent on special ed and it isn't, then who's accountable? If my child's IEP says X and the school doesn't do X, who's accountable? And difficulty is that the Ministry of Education is really not set up with a lot of accountability mechanisms yet. My mission is to try to move that along and make sure that if there's a PPM, that it's got to be a policy program memorandum about ABA in schools. It has to be more than words on paper. It has to be enforced.
How many, like PPM 140, for example, that we mentioned at the beginning of our talk, is it enforceable?
Well, the problem from a legal perspective is that PPM 140 has a lot of what I call wiggle words. So it has words like may or should or might or
It'd be a good idea.
And those of you that know the law know that it's much easier to enforce when you have stronger words like shall and will. And without exception. So the short answer to your question is, are there accountability mechanisms in place? Not yet. But let me give you one piece of good news. The OAC has joined with an organization called the AODA, the Alliance for the Ontarians with Disabilities Act. And they've been pushing for years to make Ontario more accessible. And they got a huge step forward with the passage of the Ontarians with Disabilities Act. Under that act, they're looking for standards to be established. And so they've worked on transportation standards, they've worked on standards for physical accessibility of buildings. The big one that they're finally working on right now is the Education Accessibility Standards Committee. And the committee was finally announced just a few weeks ago, and they've had their first meeting.
Are you on this committee?
Sadly, no.
Okay.
I applied to be on the committee, but our good friend David Lepofsky is on the committee, and there is representation of autism
And
there.
who is David Lepofsky?
David Lepofsky is the chair of the AODA Alliance. He's the reason that
AODA?
the thing I just said.
Yep.
So the Alliance for the Ontarians with Disabilities Act. He's the reason people with disabilities are in Section 15 of the Charter. He's a retired lawyer and an incredible advocate for the broader disability community. And one of the things that the OAC is doing right now is trying to connect with other stakeholder groups like his. Anyways, he's on the committee, and the committee's goal is to come up with some standards that will be mandatory across all school boards. And so we may start to see the building of what I'll call a floor. The problem with PPM 140 is that it created a rush to the bottom. School boards would say—
a rush to the bottom. That's a nice way to put it.
So school boards would say, oh, well, yes, we are implementing PPM 140 because we use ABA-based methods. Well, okay, I can give my kid a Skittle after they hand in their worksheet. Is that ABA? Not really, but they can say it's ABA-based, and that's that race to the bottom that I talked about. But if they get an accessibility standard for education in place, then I don't know, maybe we could have consistent standards for service dogs, or we could have consistent standards for
augmentative communications
is implemented.
Yes.
Consistent standards for assistive technology in the classroom.
Right. So Lisa is specific. She says, are they planning to meet with stakeholders and advocates? So kind of. That's
that
happening,
community
as
is
you
a
mentioned,
combination
is a
of
combination
stakeholders.
of those things. I'm very concerned about the lack of follow-through for children using augmentative communication, their access to illiteracy goals without some sort of expectation placed on the school. In many cases, without a BCBA involved in the school or a speech therapist or speech pathologist. It's a hit or miss for these kids to access literacy. And it's having a profoundly devastating effect for some kids. I mean, I can think of like our famous Carly Fleischman, for example.
Yeah.
If you don't know her name, you know, she's pretty famous now. But until she developed other methods of communicating, people did not think that she was capable of learning, and we've learned not only was she capable, she's a brilliant and interesting person. Funny, yeah.
Can I give this questioner a couple of people, and I have their permission to use their names. But,
okay.
Both of my kids on the spectrum are verbal, so this is a bit outside my expertise. But I know 2 moms in the OAC that have nonverbal kids that are really good, experienced advocates. So I would say connect with either of them. One is Lisa Pershoon. She's been involved in the OAC for a long time, and so has Kristen Ellison. And both of them have had huge struggles with their schools and assistive technology, and they can give you perhaps a more specific answer to your question on how to advocate for enforcement of, you know, the rights of students with assistive technology. Is there a PPM on assistive technology, to your knowledge?
I don't think so, but I always go back to the Human Rights Code trumps the Education Act.
Right. That's right.
And it specifically states in the Human Rights Code that education providers have a duty to accommodate students with disabilities. And they have a duty to accommodate to a point of undue hardship. However, undue hardship is not augmentative communication.
Yeah.
Can you just explain to our viewers what this concept of undue hardship means?
Or how about also augmentative, that's a big word, communication. Some kids use iPads, some kids use letterboards and will spell out what they're using. Is any other, they'll use a keyboard. PECs, yeah. And PECs are
picture exchange communications,
right? Yeah.
So many acronyms.
So there are many tools.
We do have a list of autism acronyms that we've published on, I think it's on our website, I'll double check.
And in the Education Resources Guide, I put a list of acronyms regarding education.
Yeah,
because it's alphabet.
Sorry, I interrupted you. Can you get back to your train of thought? Because I forgot.
Yeah, so, I mean, there's a number of forms of augmentative communication. It's basically communicating, I would say, without using words, without using your voice.
No, for the non-speaking person.
And I think the sad part so often is that people confuse non-speaking with non-thinking. And once we put a form of augmentative communication in these kids' hands, we see how amazingly bright they are.
Yeah.
It's like, holy cow, they were listening the whole time and picked that all up the whole time.
Yeah.
But so undue hardship is...
Can I just reverse a little bit? When Laura left the room. So when we're talking about, for example, those psych assessments and how valuable they can be, and I was saying to Christine, in my case, because my child was not able to perform for the psychologist and show what he knows, that I know he knows, in my case, I used that in my favor because my kid had huge sensory issues and I wanted him in an autism class and to get a handle on that stuff before we really even talked about learning, reading and writing and all that sort of stuff, right? But so for a non-speaking child who can't indicate what they know, and the parent has discovered they have tools that they can use to help their child do their schoolwork, and yet the school does not permit those devices or fund those devices or even allow the parents to train them. What does somebody like Lisa do if that's your issue? There's a lot of people out there there are a lot of proactive parents who are really learning how to help their kids communicate, and schools are not using those tools. This is tough. This is, this is really difficult.
So then I would go back to the Human Rights Code.
Yeah.
Is what, and so I'm the type of person where I'm like, prove it. Okay.
Yeah.
And I prove it by stating, here's what it says in the Human Rights Code. And it is right here in writing. You cannot deny this. That's just the type of person I am, where I like to prove it, and we do have a law that proves it.
And it is that important.
Mm-hmm.
If your kid cannot communicate with peers and with teachers and show that they understand the work, then like some articles we read all the time, you're going to have a kid learning their ABCs when they're perfectly capable of writing in paragraphs and writing stories and doing all kinds of wonderful work, and they're stuck. So that's a question. So this is not one of the questions here, but if you have a child in a placement, you feel that your child is stuck, they can perform much better than teachers think, and yet they are able, like we know education is performance, right? So if the child is unable to perform at a level that you think that they one day will be able to, how can you have a conversation with the school about that before they get shunted off into a class?
Yeah, either a modified curriculum or an alternative program where they're in life skills that they really shouldn't be.
Exactly.
Or what happened to my son is that the behaviors got in the way of the academics. And so the school's response, and this was in a treatment classroom, every time his behavior spiked, they would lower the academic expectations. Yeah. To the point where, to my dismay, I went in at one point and he was 14, and they were giving him grade 4 level math.
And practically, you would know that a boy like your boy, if he's bored,
that's when the behavior starts.
Yeah.
So
right?
So functional analysis is everything. When you've got behaviors going on, that's the first thing is do a functional analysis of what's causing the behavior. But then getting the school to listen to that, it's a system that's reactive. Oh, he got upset because he didn't understand this question because it was too hard. So I guess we'll just give him something.
Or maybe he got upset because it was a stupid question.
Or maybe the light.
Was buzzing. Maybe
But the thing about a human rights approach is you got to ask yourself, what would you do if this wasn't a child with special needs? If I have a student in my classroom that fails a test, that doesn't mean that I send them back a grade. It means that I teach harder, I teach differently, I teach better. But in a situation like the one that this questioner is describing, I think this is where you go into a meeting and your weapons are documents. It's the Human Rights Code, it's the policies of your school board, it's documents like the one that Christine has put into the Education Resource Guide. When things got really bad for my son, what I had to do was write a letter, and I shared it with Christine earlier this week. It was an interesting trip down memory lane because it's about 7 years ago that I wrote this big mama bear letter that was like 6 pages long. But what I did was I said, okay, so the Education Act says this, but you're doing this to my son. So please explain to me how the Education Act and the thing that you're doing go together.
So, sorry, So we've hit an hour and a half. I know I interrupted you.
That's okay.
Okay.
I did it with other documents.
Yeah, okay, good. I've got 2 more questions, and they're really good ones from Salwa and Carrie, and they kind of touch on high school. We've been talking more about little kids here. And so Salwa asks, discussing the different options starting at grade 1, communication classes or regular classes with direct support or consultative support, and finally a discussion of regular track with support or life skills and figuring out what those decisions mean for high school. So I think maybe what Salwa is asking is that if I put my kid into all these special programs, am I setting him on a stream where he will be underperforming? Is that perhaps what she's asking, I think?
It sounds to me like that's what's between the lines.
And we were sort of talking about that just now. So what's your response to someone thinking about, you've got a 6-year-old, but you're thinking about high school? Am I setting them up to fail now by asking for all these supports?
I don't think we're asking for support.
Yeah. Or specific kinds of classes.
Now, if they were to start modifying the curriculum, or if they were to start using an alternative program as opposed to accommodations. Now, sometimes they can modify the curriculum where it's a different grade level, and sometimes they can just modify certain expectations within the grade level. We could do a whole talk on
this is
on
complicated
IEPs.
stuff. This is complicated stuff.
But and sometimes kids will start off where they need a lot more modifications, and then as they progress through the grades, they might start to catch up. And I have seen cases where kids are really, really behind when they start school, but then they catch on very, very quickly, and by the time they hit grade 3 or 4, they may be right in line with their peers or ahead of their peers.
Yeah.
So I definitely would not want to necessarily back off on support. I would be a little weary of starting to alter the curriculum.
We haven't talked about stigma, right? I'm sure there is some people here who are still, a lot of us eventually, we let it all go, you know? But I'm aware, certainly. I mean, it's like, you know, my mother-in-law would say, I'm not going to tell anybody about this. Don't you worry at all. Nobody's going to know. You know, my lovely Portuguese mother-in-law. And, you know, I was always okay with people knowing. And in fact, I would freely share this because if his behaviors were just sort of out of whack, it was a shorthand for me to just get them out of my hair because my kid's having a tough time. And I'm just like, look, back off, mother. And, you know, I'll deal with my kid, right? So be careful, you know, like this working through the education system, it can feel like Game of Thrones, you know, but so special education is not about being the dumb kid.
No, it's,
or the kid
at the
who,
language
you know,
that we use, right?
Yeah.
So we have regular kids, and then we have special kids.
Yeah.
And even the language of the Education Act and the Special Education Act is set up on this assumption that, you know, we have normal and then other. And the reality is that 1 in 6 students in my classroom and anybody else's classroom have some kind of learning difference. Well, if it's 1 in 6, then that's not
so special, is it?
Right?
Yeah.
So, you know, we can get into the politics of different language and stuff another time. But the other thing that I would say on this point is that, you know, when your kid is in grade 1, it's great that you're thinking about high school, but there's a lot that you still have to learn about your kid and how your kid does in the school system. And there's a lot that your kid has to learn about what they like and what they don't like and what they're capable of. And, you know, my older kid is 18 now. He's going to be in school till he's 21, but I'm spending a lot of time reflecting back on his journey, and he's been in, I think, just about every possible IPRC placement that there is.
Yeah.
Right up to and including the Section 23 class. Yeah. So, you know, and in all of those different times, he was where he needed to be. So I guess take comfort in the fact that there is flexibility in the system if you advocate hard enough that you can move your kid from one placement to another, and that may become necessary. Again, watch out for puberty. It's awful. But I mean, it's awful no matter what.
Yeah.
Right?
For all of us.
Especially for the kids.
Yeah.
But when you do get to high school, that's where you want to be watching very carefully about what stream your kid is on.
And you know, another thing I'm learning is that I can't possibly predict what my kid is going to be like in 10 years. I just can't. Every 6 months he surprises me. It's an amazing thing.
Even with the placement, with the IPRC placement, once if your child has been placed in one of those 5 different categories, once they're in that category for 90 days, you can go back and request a review and have them changed to a different place. You can advocate to have them changed to a different placement if you feel that current placement isn't working.
This may be apropos.
May not always happen.
May not always. This may be apropos of nothing, but I sat down with the principal of the school when my child was starting grade 1, and one of the first things she said to me was, you know, not everybody goes to university.
Oh boy. And the kid was how old?
Grade 1.
What the heck?
Starting grade 1. I mean, I wasn't even thinking about that. I was thinking, like, how are we going to get from the front door to the classroom without a meltdown so that he has an okay day and he wants to go back? You know, like, that's where my head was. What? Right? So, you know, okay. Carrie, this is a similar line of questioning, and then we'll go to the questions that people have posted. And thank you, everyone, for your amazing questions. They're fantastic. We have dealt with different issues on this Facebook Live than we did for the first two. This is the third one. There's another Facebook Live about education on our Facebook page that also talks about a lot of issues, and I'm happy to see that this is a different kind of conversation. Mm-hmm. So please feel free to check it out. If you can stand looking at us for another hour. Okay, Carrie says,
I even put on makeup.
I know, me too. It doesn't show.
I know.
My face sucks makeup. It just sort of okay, so certificate. Carrie asks, thank you, Carrie. Always, Carrie has great things to suggest and say. Certificate or diploma. Mm-hmm. Tomato. So again, she's thinking ahead, right?
Yeah.
And what's the difference between a certificate and a diploma, first of all?
So a diploma states that you have met the requirements of an Ontario secondary school diploma program, which is 30 credits, some of which are mandatory, some of which are electives. So you've done those 30 credits. A certificate of completion is a certificate that you have been in high school for a certain amount of time. Mm-hmm. The difference, I suppose, is significant when it comes to employment.
Yeah.
So there are a lot of jobs that require an OSSD. But
Ontario secondary school diploma.
And one thing I want to say contrary to that, so ironically enough, I homeschool now. Not because I didn't have support.
She knows too much.
I had lots of support. We started homeschooling for other reasons. However, my son does not have to go to high school to what us homeschoolers call a brick and mortar high school in order to go to university or college.
Okay.
So when he decides he wants to apply to university or college, he can get in touch with those colleges or universities, figure out which program he wants to take and what requirements are there for those specific programs. And then he can take independent learning courses or virtual learning courses online. And more often than not, they're looking at your grade 12 marks.
Right.
So you don't necessarily need an Ontario secondary school diploma in order to go on to college or university, because there are homeschoolers every day that are getting into college and university without that specific.
So Carrie continues on and she says, can you wait to see how grade 9 goes or decide, or do you need to decide going in? So does the kid get stuck in a stream, or can she change?
They can even move, if they are in a diploma stream, they can even move between academic and applied. There are things called bridge courses.
Okay. So she asked about that. Are there substitutions, i.e. French for skills or gym for health? Are there requirements or permissions for higher ups to be sought? I'm not quite sure what she means by that.
Okay, so let me take the French thing first, because I am a French teacher.
You're a French teacher too? Oh my God, she's so smart. She's so smart.
I can teach you the passé composé until my eyes glaze over.
Oh my God.
Anyway, so there are exceptions granted. For one of the required courses is a French as a second language course. But if a student has an IEP and is a special needs student, particularly if their exceptionality is in the area of communication, and certainly we could define autism as an area of a communication difficulty, then often our kids can be exempted from taking French. So it's just a question of talking to the guidance department and getting that exemption. What were the other courses that she asked about?
She like substituting gym for health, like for
Well,
example.
health is a unit within the phys ed
Right.
course.
She has the last part of her question. This is the last question that I will ask, and then we'll go to the ones that people have posted. Thanks for hanging out with us, guys. I hope
There's
this
8 of
wasn't.
them left.
Yeah,
You brave 8.
you brave 8. Yeah,
They may not be the same 8, but
it
still.
may not be the same 8. The gorgeous 8. That's okay. We're not looking for numbers. We're
Come later.
if there's one people.
One people? Do you grammar?
Yeah,
Can you English?
no. I smart. Okay. How long can a person attend high school? Does it end the
21.
day they turn 21 or the school year they turn 21?
Oh, I don't know
I
the
think
answer
it's
to this.
the
In the States,
year,
I think it's the day. In some, but
no, I'm
not
pretty
gonna
sure
say
it's the year that they turn.
the year they
So
turn
if they're, yeah, I think it's the year that they turn 21.
We'll have to
I
double-
can try
double
and
check
find that
Let's double
information
check.
and then
I should
post
find
it.
that out. My kid's 18.
Yeah, you might want to know.
Yeah.
You might wanna
It
know.
would make no sense to me.
I
to
don't
have
think
them
it's the
stop in
day they
middle of the
turn
year.
21, yeah, because that would be
It
just,
seems kind of
yeah.
cruel. But well.
All right.
Okay, so Laura is going to
Yeah.
scroll through her phone and look for questions. I can also try. I'm terrified to touch the screen because I don't want
Laura's
to
got it.
hang
Yeah,
up.
I do.
Laura's got it.
Can we just get a thumbs up for people, the 8 of you who are watching? Would you like us to continue and answer the questions that you have posted? Or do you feel that we've touched on the issues that you wanted discussed? There's a bit of a wait.
Oh, okay.
Oh, there's a
Oh,
thumbs
there's
up.
1 thumbs up. Well, 1 is good enough for us.
Sure.
And if you're really emphatic about your question, post it again.
Yeah.
You know.
I'm not sure if I've seen all of them, but let me take a couple that I can see. So Sylvia is asking about psych ed reports. Can they test for giftedness through that assessment as well? Yes, they can. Or you said, will they? They will test for what you ask them to test for. So if you want them to test for giftedness, you can and should, because frankly, many of our kids on the spectrum are gifted. Nazanin asks, what are the parents' rights when the child is physically abused in school by an EA? They are extremely confidential and only CAS gave some information, but school is not saying a word. It's time for some more wine.
Yeah.
They said the board will contact you and they never did. He is nonverbal and it's very frustrating. My heart breaks reading this. If you suspect that your child is being physically abused, then you have the right to call Children's Aid. Any individual, if they suspect a child is being abused, has the right to call Children's Aid. Teachers and EAs, actually I can't speak for EAs. Teachers, it's a bit of a different obligation. If we suspect that a child is being abused, we actually have a positive obligation to call CAS.
Yeah.
But it works both ways, and it can be awkward because, if you have a child that's nonverbal, they can't tell you what's going on, so all you can go off of is the bruises and the marks on your kid, and you can't necessarily be sure how they were caused. But if you've got reason to be suspicious, then call. CAS will go in and do their
And
investigation.
Nazanin just said CAS called her.
Oh, wow.
Now, I'm going to share a story. There is a woman I know who contacted me and through her tears told me a story of I'm not going to say her name, I'm not going to say where she's from, let's just say she's in Ontario, that she dropped her child off at school and went shopping and looked out the window of the store, of the shopping center, and saw her non-speaking child in the middle of an intersection, of a busy intersection. Of course, she was, of course, upset and grabbed her child, marched back to the school, read them the riot act. She was very upset. And the principal of that school called the police and CAS on this family.
On the family.
On the family.
What?
Not on themselves.
No,
What?
on the family. Yes. So and here's the happier ending to this story. Yeah, it was a creepy thing to do, and dare I say a dick move, but it happened. So I sat with this mom who was biting her fingernails for, about a week over Christmas, waiting for the visit from CAS. And when CAS arrived, the worker couldn't have been better. She saw the light through the trees. She saw the situation very clearly.
Yeah.
She was very experienced. And the first thing she said to this mom is that, I'm here to advocate for your child. For your child. And it doesn't matter if I am protecting a child from abuse from wherever. Abuse happens. So CAS can be your friend. You've got to stay calm. You've got to tell your story. That is the most personal thing somebody can do. So, they can help you.
In a case like that too, I might.
And again, bring a friend. Like, have a friend. This is what this woman did. I was just there in the living room. And it sent a message. It sent a message that this mother had the support of another mother in the community.
Yeah.
And
I would be inclined also to contact the Ontario College of Teachers and possibly file a complaint if there was something that serious that had gone on.
If this is an EA, though,
but she was saying a principal or a teacher.
Okay.
But the EA wouldn't apply. But if this was a principal or a teacher causing harm, then I would be inclined to perhaps look into that complaint process.
Yes. So Nazanin, when you meet with CAS, bring a friend. Make sure that you know what it is that you want to discuss and what your issue is. If you're, for example, seeing bruises on your child's body and you're not getting an explanation as to why this is happening, I can't speculate. Obviously, none of us can in terms of your individual situation. But surround yourself with support, and
document
everything. Yeah.
Record
And
everything.
if you feel that your child is in danger, you have every right to protect your child.
And to keep them at home.
Keep them at home if need be.
necessary.
Need be.
Right?
Yes.
Demand a meeting with the principal.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I can't see any other, I see comments, but I can't see other questions.
Are
on
there
the
any
phone,
more?
But can you scroll up
Yes.
on the laptop and see
Okay.
if there's any more?
You want to do it, Christine? I'm terrified. Here's a long one.
Yeah, I'm not
Pass
seeing
that.
all of these on my phone.
Okay.
Next
that
World,
was the
hey,
first
what's
one.
the website?
Yeah,
Next World.
so www.nix-world.com. NICKS-world.com.
I'll check that out. Rubina says, what is a better option for a limited verbal child entering kindergarten, a regular class or a specialized class?
You won't like my answer, but it depends.
Yeah.
It depends more on the principal and the teacher in that school than just which type of placement it is. So you've really got to go with your comfort level. A specialized class might be the right place and might be able to provide them with additional supports to encourage them to continue to talk more. But sometimes you get that miracle teacher in a regular class that is just absolutely awesome and encourages the students to interact with your kid, and that can be wonderful too. So you got to get in there and you got to sniff it out. You got to use your mama bear and papa bear instincts.
You may be offered something what is called a diagnostic kindergarten.
Right.
And they are children that may have a diagnosis from their doctor, but they haven't had the psych assessment yet, so therefore the school hasn't determined that the child has an exceptionality.
That was the one that we just took.
Nazanin, thank you for that question, Nazanin. Good luck.
Yeah.
Good luck with that, okay? Keep us posted.
That's it.
If you have issues that you want to share, please join the Ontario Autism Coalition. Our database has room for your stories. We need to know who you are, what you're dealing with, and where you're from, most specifically. Please consider joining. The more we know, the better. The more we work together, the better. As you can see, these issues are extremely complicated and so much is left on your shoulders, likely more than you ever thought they would be. And that's the hard fact of it all. We all have to walk this walk And hopefully, we will make life better for the moms and dads who are coming behind us.
You're not alone.
You are not alone.
And
yeah.
I want to point out, being a member of our Facebook group is different from being a member through our database.
Yeah.
It doesn't cost anything to be a member on our database. It's just going to allow us, especially heading into the election, to mobilize and connect parents better. But the other thing I want to say is one of my favorite things about the Facebook group right now is the hive mind that we have access to. We are going to admit at some point today our 4,000th member, which completely blows my mind. And when you have questions about specific services, or hey, my kid just started doing this, does anybody else's kid do this? Please post the question in there. If you're shy to do that in front of so many people, then join the OAC support group. There's only 400 people in there. I don't know how that's better.
And no haters. There's no haters in that group.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah, but just understand you're not in this alone. Even when you feel like no one in your family gets it, no one in your community or your school gets it. Online, we're here for you. And I love the fact that I don't have to answer every question now. That parents are helping each other, and then that leaves me free to deal with the systemic issues.
And I'm more than happy to, if anybody wants to message me on Facebook, you can either, through my own personal Facebook page or the Nick's World page. I'm more than happy to answer whatever questions I can for people and kind of direct them. Yeah. And
we hope that these live chats help people understand that systemically there are a lot of big fish to fry. So it's not just you, but the things that go wrong at your school for you and your family are a result of a big machine with big wheels that are not moving in the right direction. And we're trying to reverse those wheels. That's what the OAC does. We are a political organization. We are nonpartisan, which is we don't care who's in government. We just want them to do the right thing, and that's what we're trying to do with common sense, with some smarts, with some expertise, and all that stuff. And we hope that you'll join us. The more voices, the better. And thank you. Okay, one last question, and then we can hang up, right? Because we're almost at 2 hours.
We are. We should take this question.
Yeah. So Carrie, Carrie of the great questions. Carrie says, "Oh, wait a minute. Oh, okay, 2 more questions. 2.
Oh
okay.
my God.
Oh no, Heather. Okay. Carrie says, "Can anyone confirm within the TDSB that psych ed assessments are getting done in diagnostic kinders?" Yes, they are. It was mentioned in a recent meeting with our OAP center. Yes, Charlie's psych assessment was done in the latter half of SK, but that school was fantastic and on it and caring. Okay, Stacy Hinkson, at what age/grade do you recommend getting the psych assessment done?
I think as soon as you need it, and as often as you need it. My kids have had several, but grade 1. Look, if you can afford to do it privately, that's one thing. But I guess if you can't, my answer to that question is you put in the request in grade 1 because it might take until grade 4 to get it.
Yeah.
But one report only captures your kid on that one day in that 1 year. You may need another one 2 or 3 years later.
Yeah. And it's talking about getting on wait. I would also get my child on a wait list for occupational therapy through the school. And I would also get my speech therapy. Yeah. And then when it finally comes around a couple of years later, if you don't need it, great, but at least you got on the list.
But and this is a great piece of information. 2 years ago, they submitted a request for speech therapy for my kid. He's yet to get it in Toronto.
It's the same way.
So anytime you are aware of a program with supports, just get your name in there. You can always say no. Apply. Always apply. Just get it done. Get her done. Heather says, does the Education Resource Guide also include recommendations for administration training for ASD? That's an excellent question.
You can add that in.
It doesn't at this point. As I was creating the guide, I thought of more and more things that I could put in it. So I'm sure it will be edited as
It'll be
as
a
we
living
go.
document.
It'll be a
Living
living
document.
document, just like the
Heather,
IAE.
I think that is a great way to close off, because there is nothing like walking into the school and having the OA, the office administrator, be friendly and welcoming. If they're not, it's a terrible feeling. And when they are, they are the window to the school. So it's a good indicator too of how you're going to be treated. I think most OAs are amazing. It's a very difficult job. So I think that's a great suggestion from Heather.
Yeah.
Should we go?
And
Should we sign
I
up?
think so. Guys, thanks for listening.
Thanks.
And,
Please feel free to share this. And whoever can stand watching the whole 2 hours, it's up to them. But please do share it. We want people to know the OAC, we're moms and dads, we're regular people. We're trying to get government to do the right thing and support our children well, because they deserve it. And it's worth it. It's worth it. They flourish, right? We want them to thrive, not just survive, right? Yeah.
guys.
Thank you, Christine. Thank you, Laura. Aren't they
Thank you,
great?
Karen.
Hey, are you kidding? Hey, okay. Bye.
Bye.
Okay, and... Oh.